With 9 months, or as tonight's guests might say, 3/4 to go until the next provincial election, the economy will be front and center in all the party platforms. And so, joining us now to do a bit of benchmarking of the Ontario economy before the political winds really pick up, we welcome Craig Alexander. He's Senior Vice President and Chief Economist of the Conference Board of Canada. April Franco, Professor of Economic Analysis and Policy at the University of Toronto, Scarborough. And Jordan Brennan, economist for the trade union Unifor. We welcome you here for the first time, and my usual co-host is back in his seat here. You've been here so often. Let's just, in the interest of full disclosure, say Unifor represents all of the folks who are taking your picture and working in that control room right now. So we put that out there just in the interest of full disclosure. Craig, where are the strengths of the Ontario economy today?
The Ontario economy is delivering really strong growth this year. It's coming in at growth rate near 3%, and anything above 2 is actually quite good for the Ontario economy. And really what we're seeing is quite broad-based strength. A lot of the strength is coming from the consumer confidence quite high. Consumers are out spending. Retail sales this year are coming in with a growth rate of close to 7%. So, consumers have their wallets open. Business investments also finally picking up, and this is something we've been waiting to see for quite a long period of time. And the economy is getting a lift from a lot of government spending in terms of infrastructure, and you certainly could experience that this summer when you drove across the province. So, when you think about it in the macro picture, the Ontario economy is doing very well, and this follows over the last 4 years. Ontario's been the second fastest growing provincial economy in Canada.
April, do you share that rather glowing report at the moment?
I think that the economy is going quite well in Ontario. One of the added benefits is that we have a very educated population, and as a result, I think it's going to allow us to move into new areas, areas where we haven't gotten yet, because I do think that we're going to start seeing manufacturing fall just as we grow bigger. And so I think that we need to think about where the future lies. And I think we're well poised for that.
Put a little flesh on that bone. New areas such as?
AI, so, artificial intelligence. I mean, this is top of mind for me right now because last week I was at a conference on artificial intelligence and thinking about what that means for us and how that's going to help. One of the downsides is that people who are unskilled or less skilled are not going to be benefiting as much. And so one of the big conversations is, what do we do in response to that? How do we get that? And because we have quite a few people with lots of skills, I think we're well poised to deal with that.
Jordan, as you take the temperature of the Ontario economy, what's your thermometer saying at the moment?
Well, there are things to be optimistic about. When you look at the labor market, for example, most people would think firstly about the unemployment rate. And now for adults in Ontario, we're under 5% on unemployment. For the entire population as a whole, we're under 6%. And over the long history, say the last 4 decades, things have scarcely been better in terms of that specific metric. I think it's the top of the boom in the late 1980s, and then the top of the boom right around 2000, right before the tech wreck. That's when unemployment rates were just slightly lower than they are today. But in the last 4 decades, the unemployment rate has never looked better than it does right now.
And therefore?
Well, that's an encouraging sign. So there are things to be, there's qualifiers to come with that, which we'll discuss.
Yeah, we're going to get to the qualifiers. But at the moment, add the level of the Canadian dollar to that right now. Is that a good sign or a bad sign?
Well, the Canadian dollar was actually giving manufacturing in Ontario a competitive advantage when it was below 82 cents. But now that the currency has jumped higher in response to the Bank of Canada 2 rate hikes that the market wasn't fully anticipating, that's moved the Canadian dollar up to what is really close to fair value.
The exchange that's in the negative category now, then?
Well, it's basically equalizing unit labor costs between Canada and the United States. And so what that's telling you is the currency isn't giving the Ontario manufacturers the advantage it was before, but it also isn't applying the brakes to the sector.
Okay, gotcha. If we were, so those are some fairly positive things that we could look to right now. Let's check the other side of the coin, which is that, there are some concerns out there, obviously. Jordan, you want to start us off on when you look at what concerns you about the Ontario economy? What are you looking at?
Yeah, well, I'll stay with the labor market. So low unemployment's good. Everyone sees that. But that conceals a more mixed bag of things. So we see the labor market continue to polarize. We see significant job creation on the upper end of the income distribution, things like science and technology and the professions and healthcare as well. The high income categories, they're growing quite robustly. But we also see rapid growth at the lower paying jobs too, things like food services and hospitality. So we see a further polarization in the wage distribution, which is going to exacerbate income inequality. And it's more of the longer term pattern of a growth of precarious workforce. And so I'd be concerned about that for starters. And then the second feature, which is definitely contributing to the slowdown in economic growth, is this huge demographic turnover that we're seeing. You know, like the baby boomers, this bulge in the demographic distribution, it's moved its way through the age brackets, and now it's spilling over into retirement. And so, for example, back in the mid-1970s, 81% of adult males were employed, and now today we're down to 67%. And that's quite a significant change.
They called it a he session for a reason.
Yeah, indeed.
Right? Males took the brunt of the economic downturn from the Great Recession. What would you add as you look at potential negative signs out there? What's on your list?
Well, I think the big concern, at least for me, is that, you know, what is going on south of the border. Ontario is, their biggest trading partner is the U.S., and so some of the things that are going on in the U.S. could lead to very big problems for us.
For example?
The idea of Buy American and putting restrictions on, you know, NAFTA, changing NAFTA the way that it is, you know, I think that could put us in poor stead, because most of the largest exporters are autos and auto parts. And so that could really be a problem for us in the future.
I know you're not a political scientist, you're an economist, but I suspect you do have political views, and I want to just sort of touch on those a bit, because Premier Kathleen Wynne was in Washington last week to meet with some high-ranking members of the American government there, including Wilbur Ross, the Trade Secretary. And, you know, she said, we don't want to get into a trade war with you guys, but we will if we have to. What'd you make of all that?
Well, I think that ultimately we need to negotiate a new NAFTA that actually works for everybody. And the good news is that there actually is scope to improve NAFTA. It could be a win-win-win for all three governments if we actually get the ideal trade deal. But I think the negotiations are going to be very tough. And so I differentiate between the public messages that we get from Trump or other politicians versus what's actually the conversation in the room when they're actually negotiating the trade deal.
But do you think through what could happen to the Ontario economy if the United States makes good, as April says, on this Buy American provision?
It's the single biggest risk to the Ontario economy. And you know, quite frankly, we don't know what we're going to get from the renewed negotiations. 83% of Ontario exports go to the United States. So yes, we've been diversifying over time, but we're still very much plugged into a North American supply chain. So it's absolutely essential that we maintain access to that marketplace. You know, when you get the bombastic statements that President Trump makes, you know, it sounds like, you know, America is going to walk away from the table, or, you know, the trade talks are going to fall apart. I think the trade negotiators on the U.S. side are actually very practical and realistic. One of the most interesting things I think about this negotiation is the timeline they've given themselves. They want to have a resolution by the end of this year. Your average trade deal takes about 3, 4, or 5 years to actually negotiate.
And they want to knock it off in a few months.
And they want to do it in like four or 5 months, right? So this is extremely difficult timeline. The reason they're doing that is because we have a Mexican presidential election early next year. We also have the U.S. midterm election. So it's going to get much more political the closer we get to those events. So I ultimately think that it is absolutely critical for Ontario firms to continue to have good access to the U.S. market. I think ultimately that's what we will get. I think our biggest champions are actually the U.S. companies that are affected by the cross-border trade. And so as a result, you know, ultimately I think this will work out, but it's the #1 risk.
Would you share that view that the NAFTA negotiations and/or the Buy American provisions are the #1 risk to the Ontario economy today?
I think it's a pretty big risk. I agree with you on that point.
Jordan, how about you?
Certainly, that is among the major risks. It's always hard to balance the broader geopolitical situation. I mean, you know, imagine worst case scenario happens in North Korea, we get involved in some sort of nuclear exchange with North Korea. That will grind the wheels of commerce down pretty quickly, I think. So, but if we're just staying within the sort of boundaries of the geopolitical boundaries, I would say that yes, given the huge dependency we have on the U.S. market, that would, you know, our members, for example, in forestry, we've got tens of thousands of members in forestry. Now that the U.S. administration has cranked up tariffs, it's having a significant impact on the forestry and the broader pulp and paper sector. So it's very real, the impact.
Let me put something else on the table here, and that is as we look at risks, potential risks to the Ontario economy, and I don't know which this is, because I'm looking for that one-armed economist who's just going to say it's this, not it's this on one hand and this on the other hand. Like Harry Truman, we're still looking for that guy. There's going to be in the province of Ontario over the next 15 months, ultimately a 32% increase to the minimum wage. We have heard some business groups say this is going to potentially affect more than 100,000 jobs in the province. The Financial Accountability Officer, who's a neutral reporter to the provincial parliament on this, says more than 50,000 jobs at risk. The Premier and her team and other groups, I suspect Unifor is one of them, say, on the contrary, this is going to raise a lot of boats and stave off a lot of poverty. I want to get your sense of where things are at on that with you. What do you think?
So, you know, in Economics 101, when you took it in college, you probably heard that minimum wage is bad in general, partially because it imposes this constraint on the quantity demanded at that price is less than the quantity supplied at that price. And so there's a lot of people who would like jobs at that price, but they can't get them. And there's been a lot of empirical research on exactly this issue. And
does it help us?
I wish I could say that it clearly says this is absolutely a job killer. Here's what we've seen for most of the research. Most of the research says that in general, it hurts people who are at the low end. You know, the people who you would most like to benefit from this are the ones who are most affected. So those people who are already receiving more than the minimum wage do better, but those who are receiving the minimum wage, they end up losing jobs. And so who are those people? They are the unskilled or low-skilled, oftentimes not, you know, high school graduates, but that's about it. And they are young people. And so these are teenagers.
Because they're not going to get hired. Because
they're not going to get hired. So getting that first job in is harder for them suddenly. Now, the other part, so there is some empirical work here that, you know, one of the big problems that economists face is that we don't have laboratories that we can run these experiments in. That's what we'd like to do, because then we could absolutely separate out what's going on from everything else. But what we have is laboratories of human beings and governments and lots of policy changes all happening at the same time, along with macroeconomic effects that you can't predict.
So if the economy gets better or worse, you never know if it's the minimum wage or something else.
One thing or the other, right? But the big issue is that what we also see and what we're concerned about, what economists are concerned about with minimum wage, is that it affects prices as well. So yes, you have given people more money, but now everything costs more. And so does that really help us?
Let's find out from Jordan. Over the next 15 months, there's going to be a 32% rise in the minimum wage. What do you think that will do to the Ontario economy?
I think giving, so presently there is roughly 500,000 people working directly at the minimum wage. And this increase in the minimum up to 15 is going to catch 1.6 million people, Ontarians, in its net.
That's $15 an hour.
That's $15 an hour, yeah. So you flagged the Financial Accountability Office study, and it's very important that we read that document carefully, because the document actually doesn't say that 50,000 people are going to be laid off, even though they did use the language of job loss. When you look at, it's buried in a footnote somewhere, it's disemployment effects. So that includes layoffs, but it also includes a reduction in work hours, and it also includes decelerating job creation. So that's a future job that might be created may not be created now.
So that's very different. Won't get hired.
But that's very different than someone now, especially someone who's a breadwinner getting laid off, who has significant financial responsibilation. So, so that's an important qualifier. That 50,000.
Okay, but it's a negative report. I mean, the report was unambiguously negative. I appreciate your point that it's not 50,000 people losing their jobs tomorrow, but the report doesn't suggest that raising the minimum wage by that much will be a net positive of the Ontario economy.
I disagree.
Okay,
that was not my interpretation of the report, and I wrote a blog post on this, and I said that the economists at the Financial Accountability Office, their conclusions didn't fit their own evidence. Just let's accept as truthful all their predictions. It is not clear to me that giving 60% of the people who are going to benefit from this are below median income. And that's going to sweep not just 1.6 million people, it's going to be upwards of 2 million workers, probably something like 25, almost 30% of Ontario's labor force is set to get a significant pay raise. Why does that matter? Huge, huge economic literature on the economics of well-being. What happens when your income goes up? Your health outcomes improve, including longevity. That reduces healthcare spending and hospital spending. Your happiness goes up, and happiness measured either as emotional well-being or overall life satisfaction. It's very hard for a government, by the way, to pull a single lever that can make millions of people happier in their daily lives. And that's what this is set to do. So if we take away the negative, that 50,000 job loss, say, okay, 50,000 people may be negatively affected over 3 years. 2 million people stand to benefit immediately, directly, now. Is that a policy trade-off worth making? You know, in the policy game, there's always going to be a negative trade-off to make, and that seems to me a trade-off that would be worth making.
Well, and Craig, and I know the Premier's team feels that unlike, say, richer people who, if they got a 32% increase, would, you know, send the money offshore or put it into an RSP or something like this, the people who get this money will spend it, which will encourage economic activity, which I assume you think is a good thing.
So putting in place the minimum wage makes the cost of labor more expensive, but you are giving an awful lot of workers a higher income, and lower income individuals tend to spend as opposed to save that additional income.
I think I just said that,
I think what it does is it creates an offset, right? So, you know, that's why you have to be very careful that when you do the modeling around what the impact is. You have to recognize the positive stimulus it creates, but you also have to recognize what does it do from a hiring point of view. And I think one of the challenges here is that, you know, I agree, first-year economics, one of the first things they show you to illustrate supply and demand is a minimum wage example to show you that it cuts employment. The actual experience is a little different. The level of the minimum wage rate matters. So let's imagine Ontario only had a minimum wage rate today of $5 an hour, and it went up to $6 an hour. The employment effect would be virtually negligible because the median wage, the average wage in Ontario is, say, closer to $27. Mm-hmm. A lot of the literature argues that when you get past about 50% of the median wage, that's where now all of a sudden you're going to have bigger employment effects. I think this is where, from a point of view of what happens in Ontario, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, because my reading of this is that going from $11.25 an hour up to about $13.50 wasn't going to have much employment effect, but when you go beyond that $13.50 an hour, you start having much bigger employment effects.
You're past the sweet spot at that point.
You're past the sweet spot.
We've got just a few minutes left here, and I want to do one more thing, because over the next 9 months, we are going to hear a lot from, I'll say, the four major political parties, the Liberals, the Progressive Conservatives, the New Democrats, and the Greens, about what they intend to do to improve everybody's economic fortunes over the ensuing 4 years. I want to get, April, to you first, I want to get a better understanding of what governments are entitled to take credit for. The unemployment rate we've pointed out is low. We have an apparently balanced budget. I say apparently because, again, the Financial Accountability Officer is not completely sold on that. We have other, as you folks pointed out off the top of the program, other metrics by which we can say the economy is doing well. What are the Liberals entitled to take credit for, in your view?
Well, I think that's a hard question in the sense
that's why I asked.
Right. You know, I think I would argue that they haven't made huge mistakes, but I can't point to the one thing that they've done that you think, oh, that's really changed the lives of individuals. And that for sure, it's only that. not something else. I guess I tend to be a little bit more pessimistic about policy. I think that you can really screw things up in the sense that, you know, we've seen examples where governments have done things that have really changed outcomes in the long term.
One example?
So one example is the French requirement in Quebec in the 70s. And so that was a policy that, you know, didn't seem like it was going to be that big of an effect, but all of a sudden headquarters moved out of Quebec.
Big exodus.
Like crazy. And, you know, Toronto happened to benefit from that, for one thing. And so we do see cases where governments can really make big mistakes.
Okay, Jordan, to you on what governments are entitled to take credit for and not entitled to take credit for.
Well, they can't take credit for the weather and things of that kind, but like, you know, it's very hard because when things are going well, the government's going to say, well, it's because of our activities, and when things are going poorly, it's broader economic forces. It's very hard to pinpoint causality here. It's so difficult. There's so many moving parts. You've got seasonal adjustments. You've got the whole business cycle. You've got the long arc of technological change. There's all sorts of things that are happening that aren't directly a consequence of government policy. So I would say that governments probably do tend to overstate the things they can do that are positive, and perhaps even on the negative side too. I would flag two things though. I think Bill 148, which will include this $15 minimum wage we just discussed, I think that will improve people's lives in a significant way. And I also think it's tactically brilliant because the first pay increase comes in January up to $14. And then whoever is going to oppose that, if Patrick Brown and the PCs want to oppose that, that's great. But they've got to tell 25 to 30% of the labor market that they're not entitled to that next pay raise, or that they may have to roll it back. You're going to make yourself quite unpopular, I think, when you're going to tell a quarter of Ontario's workforce that they should take a pay cut. So tactically, I think that is brilliant, the timing of it.
Just for the record, I think his position is they may have to wait a little longer for that pay increase, but there's certainly no intention to roll back whatever increase has already been put through.
Yeah, sorry, I meant hypothetically if someone was to run against that. The other thing now, it's more in the distant past, but what can the government take credit for? We hit a significant economic turbulence in 2007. And the governments did what they should have done back then, is they ran significant budgetary deficits to try to stabilize the job losses. You know, between 2007 and 2009, we lost about 300,000 jobs in terms of the labor market, and 250,000 can be indirectly ascribed to manufacturing. And the government tried to plug that hole at the cost of significant budgetary deficits and an increase in the debt load. I think that was actually a responsible thing to do. That was the wise economic choice to make, even though it made them unpopular in some people's view.
Right. Craig, last word to you on, I hear it almost every day in question period, our government has created 300,000 new jobs in the province of Ontario. Have they really?
Well, a lot of the job creation is part of the economic cycle. And what we're seeing is a stronger global economy that's helped support a stronger Canadian economy, which is also reflected in a stronger Ontario. You know, I think from a government policy point of view, the government has tried to help facilitate growth. But I think that there are some big looming issues out there and some vulnerabilities. From a point of view of the latest census numbers showed that the percentage of Ontarians that are at the low income level or lower, in other words, in poverty, has increased. It's gone from 12% to 14.5%. Between 2005 and 2015. So poverty is rising in Ontario. So I think there's an issue here that over the last 4 years, the economy's been doing better, jobs are getting created, the unemployment rate has declined, hasn't lifted all boats equally. And there's certain things the government can say they've been doing to try and alleviate those issues. But at the same time, I mean, this is still a pressing problem underneath the surface of, in aggregate, Ontario's economy is doing well. But there's pockets of weakness. I think we ultimately need to do more in terms of helping upskill the labor force, address a lot of workers that are being displaced by technology. And that's my big fear moving forward, is AI and machine learning is going to be even more disruptive to the labor market. And I think we need to have a real focus on giving workers the skills they need. We need to change the policies to help support workers that do experience some displacement. And these are things that the government's going to have to focus on. So I think, you know, there's going to be things the government's going to say, hey, look, we've done all these great things, and there's things the opposition are going to be able to point to and say, yeah, but look at some of these other negative outcomes.
Let the games begin. There we go. Thanks to the three of you tonight for helping us out with this. April Franco, University of Toronto Scarborough campus, still waiting for her one-stop subway. Craig Alexander, Senior VP and Chief Economist at the Conference Board of Canada. and Jordan Brenner, the Unifor economist. Good to have all of you at TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.